The sound of a slap can be a whisper or a thunderclap. In the cavernous marble foyer of the Blackwood estate, it was an earthquake. It was the sound of a world ending, before a silent audience of household staff and the gleeful smirk of his Mistress billionaire CEO Ethan Blackwood struck his 5 months pregnant wife, Genevieve. The sting on her cheek was nothing compared to the shattering of her heart. But in the twisted wreckage of their lives that followed, a secret lay buried, a truth so explosive it would prove that the ultimate betrayal hadn't even happened yet. The Blackwood mansion wasn't a home. It was a monument. Perched atop the highest hill overlooking the city of Sterling Heights, its vast windows drank in the skyline like a predator surveying its territory. Inside, Italian marble floors stretched into infinity, reflecting the cold light of crystal chandeliers. Every surface was polished, every corner dustless, curated by a silent, efficient staff who moved like ghosts through the cavernous halls. It was a perfect house for a perfect couple. From the outside, Ethan and Genevieve Blackwood were the city's royalty. He was the self-made titan of Orion Innovations, a man whose ambition was as sharp and unforgiving as the cut of his custom-tailored suits. She was the architect's daughter, beautiful and poised, the graceful counterpart to his brutalist success. But inside the monument, the silence was a disease. Genevieve stood before the floor-to-ceiling window in their master suite, one hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her belly. 5 months. 5 months of carrying the child she had prayed would be the bridge over the chasm that had opened between them. Outside, the city lights twinkled a galaxy of lives being lived with warmth and connection she could only dream of. The reflection in the glass showed a woman swathed in a silk robe, her face pale, her eyes holding a deep, resonant loneliness. Ethan was a creature of schedules and acquisitions. He acquired companies' assets, and 10 years ago, a wife. He treated their marriage with the same detached efficiency as a corporate merger. He provided security luxury and a name that opened every door. In return, he expected loyalty perfection, and above all, quiet compliance. Love had been an early-term line item, long since depreciated. Her pregnancy hadn't changed that. When she'd told him, her hands trembling as she held up the positive test, he had looked at it not as a miracle, but as a planned succession. Good, he'd said, his eyes already on the stock market ticker on his phone. A son, an heir for Orion. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't asked how she felt. He had simply approved the next phase of the Blackwood strategic plan. The evenings were the worst. Ethan would return late, the scent of the city, and a faint, unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. He would retreat to his study, a fortress of mahogany and leather, where he took calls in a low, intimate voice he never used with her. Genevieve knew about the other woman. She didn't know her name, but she knew her presence. It was in the sudden chill in Ethan's demeanor, the way he flinched from her touch, the cruel, dismissive remarks that had become his primary mode of communication. The woman's name was Victoria Vance. Genevieve didn't know this yet, but she would soon. Victoria was everything Genevieve was not. She was a VP of marketing from a rival firm Ethan was planning to acquire, fiery, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. She saw Ethan not as a husband, but as a prize, and Genevieve as the sole obstacle to be removed. Tonight was their 10th wedding anniversary. A decade, a lifetime. Genevieve had tried to mark the occasion. She'd had the chef prepare his favorite meal-seared scallops with a saffron risotto. She wore a deep emerald gown that complemented her auburn hair and the slight flush of her pregnancy. She'd waited in the vast dining hall where a single elegantly set table for two looked like a lifeboat lost in a black marble sea. He arrived at 10 p.m. He didn't even glance at the table. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice sharp with irritation as he loosened his tie. "It's our anniversary, Ethan," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. He scoffed a dry, humorless sound. "An anniversary. Right. I have an early flight to Tokyo. I don't have time for this theatricality." The word struck her. Theatricality, as if her attempt at connection was a performance designed to annoy him. "I thought we could just have one dinner. For us. For the baby." He finally looked at her, then his gaze sweeping over her body with a clinical detachment. "The baby is fine. It's getting the best of everything. It doesn't need a sentimental dinner." He turned to leave, heading for his study. "She called you tonight, didn't she?" The words slipped out before Genevieve could stop them, born of a decade of repressed pain. Ethan froze his back, ramrod straight. He turned slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. "What did you say? The reason you're late? The reason you can't even look at me? It's her, isn't it?" Tears pricked her eyes, hot and shameful. "Whoever she is." He walked towards her, his steps deliberate and menacing. He stopped just inches away, forcing her to crane her neck to look up at his towering frame. "My business is my business, Genevieve. Your role is to manage this house and carry my son. Do you understand? Do not delude yourself into thinking you have a say in any other aspect of my life." The cruelty of his words was a physical blow. She flinched, a hand flying to her stomach, as if to shield the innocent life within from his venom. "He's my son, too," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He is a Blackwood," Ethan corrected her, his voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "And you would do well to remember the privilege and the precarity of the position you hold because of him." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the cavernous dining room with the untouched food growing cold on the table. The silence rushed back in, heavier and more suffocating than before. As Genevieve stood there, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, she felt the first real flutter of her baby's movement. It was a tiny, insistent kick against her palm. It wasn't a comfort. It felt like a desperate plea, a tiny prisoner rattling the bars of their shared, gilded cage. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that this life of silent suffering could not continue. A storm was coming, and she was standing directly in its path. The annual Orion Innovations Foundation Gala was the pinnacle of Sterling Heights' social calendar. It was a night of performative philanthropy, where the city's elite gathered to write checks, sip champagne, and size each other up under the light of colossal chandeliers. For Genevieve, it was an ordeal. It was the night she had to play her part most convincingly, the adoring, perfect wife to the city's most powerful man. This year, the dread was a physical weight in her stomach. Ethan had barely spoken to her in the week since their anniversary, his presence in the house a cold, oppressive fog. He had instructed his assistant to procure a gown for her, a stunning, silver-beaded creation that clung to her changing body. It felt less like a gift and more like a costume for the role he expected her to play. As they stepped out of the black town car, flashes from paparazzi cameras exploded like fireworks. Ethan's hand was a vice on the small of her back, not guiding her, but propelling her forward. He smiled for the cameras, a flash of white teeth in a predator's grin. She mirrored his smile, a fragile, hollow thing. Inside the ballroom was a swirling vortex of couture and influence. People flocked to Ethan, moths to a billion-dollar flame. Genevieve stood by his side, a silent, smiling accessory. She saw Nathan read Ethan's TOO and closest friend across the room. He caught her eye and gave her a small, sympathetic smile. Nathan was the only one in their circle who seemed to see the cracks in the facade. He often engaged her in genuine conversation, asking about her well-being, with a kindness that felt like a foreign language compared to Ethan's curt directives. "Genevieve, you look radiant," Nathan said, approaching them during a lull. "Motherhood suits you." "Thank you, Nathan," she said, her smile for him, feeling a little more real. Ethan clapped Nathan on the shoulder, his grip possessive. "We're ensuring the Blackwood legacy, aren't we, old friend? Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to have a word with the mayor." He steered Genevieve away without a backward glance. The evening wore on a blur of meaningless conversations and fake laughter. Genevieve felt a growing unease. Ethan was distracted, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, his jaw tight. He was looking for someone. Her blood ran cold. She's here, she thought. He brought her here. And then she saw her. Standing near the grand staircase was a woman of sharp angles and sharper ambition. She wore a crimson dress that was both elegant and audacious, a slash of colour in a sea of muted tones. Her raven hair was cut in a severe modern bob, and her eyes were locked on Ethan with an intensity that was both a challenge and a promise. Genevieve watched as Ethan's gaze found the woman in red, and a flicker of something frustration or perhaps desire crossed his face. This was Victoria Vance. As if drawn by an invisible string, Victoria began to move through the crowd, a shark gliding towards its prey. She intercepted Ethan as he was speaking to a senator. Genevieve, standing a few feet away, could only watch. Victoria placed a perfectly manicured hand on Ethan's arm, her touch lingering. She leaned in and whispered something in his ear, her red lips almost brushing his skin. Ethan's face remained impassive, but he didn't pull away. Genevieve felt a wave of nausea, her carefully constructed composure threatening to crumble. She needed air. Excusing herself quietly, she made her way towards the French doors that led to a secluded terrace. The cool night air was a relief against her feverish skin. She leaned against the stone balustrade, closing her eyes and breathing deeply, trying to calm the frantic kicking in her womb. "It's a pathetic sight, you know." The voice, sharp and laced with condescending pity, came from behind her. Genevieve turned. Victoria Vance stood in the doorway, a champagne flute held delicately in her hand. "Hiding out here while your husband entertains his guests." Victoria took a slow sip, her eyes raking over Genevieve's pregnant form with undisguised contempt. "You really thought a baby would be enough to keep him, didn't you? It's the oldest, most desperate trick in the book." "I don't know who you are," Genevieve said, her voice shaking slightly, "but you are mistaken." Victoria laughed, a brittle, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I think you know exactly who I am. I'm the future. You," she said, gesturing with her glass, "are the inconvenient expiring contract he's too sentimental to terminate." The sheer audacity of the woman stole Genevieve's breath. "My husband and I are having a child. You are a distraction. You mean nothing." "Nothing?" Victoria's smile widened. "Is that what he tells you in that cold, empty bed of yours? He tells me everything, Genevieve. He tells me how you trap him, how your weakness suffocates him. He comes to me to breathe." Each word was a poisoned dart. Genevieve felt her control snapping. "Get away from me," she hissed. "Or what you'll cry, you'll run to him. He doesn't want you. He wants a partner, an equal. Not a fragile, pregnant liability." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's only with you now out of some misplaced sense of duty. But duty fades, and I am very, very patient." At that moment, the doors to the terrace opened again. It was Ethan. His face was a thundercloud. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Victoria's expression shifted instantly from venomous to victimized. Her eyes welled with tears. "Ethan, thank God. I was just trying to congratulate her, and she attacked me. She said the most horrible things." She let out a small theatrical sob. "She threatened me. She said I needed to stay away from you or she'd ruin me." Genevieve stared, dumbfounded by the blatant, masterful lie. "What, that's not true. She was the one." "Enough." "Genevieve." Ethan's voice was like ice. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on Victoria's deceptively fragile face. "Ethan, you have to listen to me," Genevieve pleaded, stepping forward and reaching for his arm. "She's lying. She came out here and—" "I said enough!" he roared, turning on her with a ferocity that made her recoil. His face was contorted with a rage she had never seen before. "Must you cause a scene everywhere we go? Can you not for one night conduct yourself with some dignity?" "She is the one causing a scene," Genevieve cried, her voice rising with desperation. "She's trying to destroy our marriage. You're the one destroying it," Ethan yelled, his voice echoing on the terrace. He took a menacing step toward her. "With your constant neediness, your emotional games, your weakness, that's not fair." She sobbed, tears now streaming down her face. "I am carrying your child." Victoria, seeing her opening, let out another small, pained gasp from behind him. "Ethan, please, let's just go. Don't let her upset you." That was the final push, Ethan's mind poisoned by Victoria's whispers, and his own deep-seated resentment snapped. He saw Genevieve not as his pregnant wife, but as the source of all his frustration. He saw Victoria as the sleek, uncomplicated future he craved. In that moment of pure, unadulterated fury, he raised his hand. The slap was shockingly loud in the sudden silence. It whipped Genevieve's head to the side, the force of it sending her stumbling backward. A collective gasp came from several guests who had been drawn to the doorway by the shouting. Time seemed to stop. The city lights blurred through her tear-filled eyes. The sting on her cheek was a wildfire, but the pain in her soul was an Arctic freeze. She brought a trembling hand to her face, her stunned gaze finding his. Ethan's face was a mixture of shock and fury. For a split second, a flicker of regret, of horror at his own action crossed his features. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a hardened mask of self-justification. Victoria slid her arm through his, pressing against him. "You are hysterical," he said, his voice cold and steady, meant for the audience as much as for her. "I'm having my driver take you home. We will discuss your outrageous behavior later." He turned his back on her. He took Victoria's arm, and without a single look back at his pregnant wife, whose cheek was already beginning to bloom with a dark red mark, he guided his mistress back into the glittering ballroom, leaving Genevieve utterly devastatingly alone on the terrace. The world had not just ended. It had been publicly executed. The drive back to the mansion was a silent, suffocating blur. The driver, a man who had worked for Ethan for 15 years, kept his eyes glued to the road, his face a stony mask of professional neutrality. Genevieve didn't cry. The tears had frozen somewhere deep inside her, turning into shards of ice. She sat perfectly still, one hand on her belly, the other pressed against her throbbing cheek. The slap was more than an act of violence. It was a declaration. He had made his choice. When she arrived, the mansion felt more like a mausoleum than ever. The staff averted their eyes, their silence thick with pity and fear. She walked past them, up the grand, curving staircase, her silver gown trailing behind her like a shroud. In their bedroom, she didn't pack a suitcase full of clothes. She took a small carry-on bag and filled it with only the essentials toiletries, a change of clothes, her prenatal vitamins, and a small, worn photograph of her parents. She walked over to her jewelry box and took only one item, her mother's simple gold locket, leaving behind the mountain of diamonds and precious stones Ethan had gifted her over the years. They weren't gifts, they were bonuses, payments for services rendered. She walked out of the Blackwood estate without a sound, leaving the key to the gilded cage on the hall table. She took a taxi to a nondescript luxury hotel in the city's business district, checking in under her maiden name, Genevieve Sterling. In the sterile anonymity of the hotel room, the ice inside her finally began to thaw, and the sobs came deep, ragged, soul-wrenching sounds of a decade of pain being released at once. The next morning, her face swollen, and her cheek a mottled canvas of purple and blue. She made a phone call. Jessica Shaw was one of the most feared divorce attorneys in the state. She was known for being a shark, for taking on powerful men and dismantling their empires piece by piece. Jessica Shaw. The voice on the other end of the line was crisp and businesslike. "Jessica, it's Genevieve. Genevieve Blackwood," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "I need your help." There was a pause. "I see," Jessica said, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. "My office. 1 hour." Meanwhile, Ethan Blackwood woke up with a dull headache and a fouler mood. The gala had been a success from a business standpoint, but the scene on the terrace had been a PR nightmare in the making. Whispers were already circulating. Victoria was with him, curled up in Genevieve's side of the bed. She was cloying in the morning light, her performance of the devoted mistress already wearing thin. "You did the right thing," Victoria purred, tracing a finger along his jaw. "She's unstable. It's not good for the baby or for the Orion brand." "Get dressed," Ethan said, his voice flat as he shrugged off her touch. "I have work to do." He was annoyed at Genevieve for her emotionalism, annoyed at Victoria for her theatrics, but mostly annoyed at the messiness of it all. He managed corporate takeovers with surgical precision. His personal life was becoming a chaotic liability. He expected Genevieve to be in the house, ready to cry, to apologize, to be managed. When he found she was gone, a flicker of surprise was quickly replaced by irritation. He assumed it was another dramatic gesture, another bid for attention. She'd be back by nightfall, he told himself. She had nowhere else to go. But as one day turned into 2, and then a week with no word from her, a strange unease began to creep into the edges of his consciousness. His only communication was a crisp formal email from the offices of Shaw and Associates, informing him that all future correspondence regarding his wife should be directed to them. The name gave him a jolt. Jessica Shaw. This was not a plea for attention. This was a declaration of war. Life with Victoria was not the seamless upgrade he had imagined. She was possessive demanding, and her ambition was a hungry, relentless thing. She moved her things into the mansion with unseemly haste, her presence a garish splash of color against the cool, elegant austerity Genevieve had cultivated. The staff was sullen, the house felt wrong. He found himself wandering into rooms expecting to see Genevieve curled up with a book and feeling a strange, hollow disappointment when she wasn't there. Victoria, sensing his disquiet, doubled her efforts to poison him against his wife. A friend of mine at the club told me Genevieve was always a bit of a sad case, she'd say over dinner. Apparently she had a close friendship with that artist from the gallery downtown before you were married. Very bohemian. Or, "It's so strange that she left without a word. It's almost like she had a plan. People who have nothing to hide don't hire Jessica Shaw." The seeds of doubt once planted began to take root in the fertile ground of Ethan's arrogance and suspicion. He had always seen Genevieve as fragile and dependent, but her sudden strength and silence were unnerving. What if Victoria was right? What if there was more to Genevieve's quiet sadness than he had ever bothered to understand? The final catalyst came from an unexpected source. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional named Peterson, tasking him with a simple job: find out where Genevieve was staying and what her strategy was. He wanted to be ahead of Jessica Shaw's game. A week later, Peterson delivered his report. It contained the hotel information financial records showing Genevieve was using a personal trust fund her father had left her, and details of her meetings with Jessica. But there was one other thing, an anomaly Peterson had included in a footnote. Mrs. Blackwood made a single brief visit to St. Jude's Medical Center 2 days ago. The report read, "Not to the obstetrics wing, but to the paternity and genetics lab. She was there for less than 30 minutes. Ethan stared at the words, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. The paternity lab. Why would she go there? The question was a spark in a powder keg. His mind, already primed by Victoria's insidious whispers, began to race. Her distance over the past year, her sudden desperate desire for a child after years of ambivalence, her quiet defiance. Was it possible? Could the ultimate symbol of his legacy, the heir he had already factored into his dynastic plans, not be his? The thought was a profound personal insult, an attack on his very essence. His pride, far more vast and vulnerable than his fortune, was wounded. He looked at the name of the lab again. St. Jude's. It would be a simple matter for a man of his resources to get access to their records. He wouldn't even need a court order. A significant donation to the hospital's new wing would suffice. He had to know. He dismissed Victoria's calls for attention, that evening locking himself in his study. The silence of the house pressed in on him. For the first time, he didn't feel powerful. He felt a cold, creeping dread. He had struck his wife, driven her away, and installed his mistress in her place, all under the assumption that he was the aggrieved party, the one being manipulated. But as he made the call that would set the wheels in motion, a terrifying new possibility began to form in his mind. What if he wasn't the king in this chess game? What if he was just the pawn? The truth was coming, and he had a sickening feeling that it would unravel not just his marriage, but his entire carefully constructed world. The wait for the information was agonizing. For 3 days, Ethan Blackwood, a man who controlled markets and commanded armies of employees with a single word, was rendered powerless. He was short-tempered with his staff, dismissive of Victoria, and unable to focus on the billion-dollar deals waiting for his approval. He found himself staring at the pristine, empty nursery that Genevieve had been decorating a room of soft yellows and gentle whites, and felt a confusing mix of fury and a strange, unidentifiable loss. The encrypted email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The subject line was blank. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he clicked it open. It contained a single password-protected PDF. He typed in the code Peterson had given him, and the file opened. It was a copy of a prenatal paternity test report from St. Jude's Medical Center. His eyes scanned past the medical jargon, the locus markers, and the allele sizes, searching for the conclusion. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the page, in stark, clinical black and white, was the summary. Alleged father Ethan R. Blackwood. Probability of paternity 0%. The 2 characters 0 and the percentage sign seemed to leap off the screen. 0. The word echoed in the vast emptiness of his study. 0. It was a perfect, absolute, and brutal negation of everything he had believed. The child his heir, the future of the Blackwood name, was not his. A primal roar of rage tore from his throat. He swept his arm across his mahogany desk, sending his laptop, papers, and a crystal glass crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass was nothing compared to the implosion of his world. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it momentarily paralyzed him. Every memory of the past year was instantly recontextualized. Genevieve's sadness wasn't loneliness, it was guilt. Her desire for a child wasn't a longing for family, it was a calculated, deceitful trap. The slap, the public humiliation, in his twisted, wounded mind, he felt instantly justified. He hadn't been a monster. He had been a fool, the victim. He had to see her. He had to confront her with this ultimate treachery. He drove himself breaking every speed limit as he tore through the city streets towards her hotel. He didn't call. He didn't warn her. He stormed through the lobby, ignoring the concierge's protests, and took the elevator to her floor. He pounded on the door of her suite, the sound echoing down the quiet hallway. Genevieve opened the door, her face pale. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow-green. She was wearing simple leggings and a soft sweater, and for a moment she just looked like a tired, pregnant woman. "Ethan." She breathed, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you doing here?" He pushed past her into the room, his presence sucking all the air out of it. He was vibrating with a barely controlled fury. "Don't you Ethan me," he snarled, turning to face her. "Don't you dare stand there and look at me with those innocent eyes. What are you talking about?" she asked, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "This," he roared, thrusting his phone into her face, the damning report glowing on the screen. 0% Genevieve. "That's what I am to this child you're carrying. 0. Genevieve flinched back, her eyes falling on the screen. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. She didn't feign surprise. She didn't deny it. A look of profound, heartbreaking sadness washed over her. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a weary resignation. She closed her eyes and took a shuddering breath. "How could you?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He began to pace the room like a caged tiger. "How could you do this to me? To my name? You lived in my house, spent my money, all while carrying another man's bastard child. Don't call him that," she whispered, her voice finding a sliver of steel. "Don't call him what a bastard." He laughed, a horrifying, joyless sound. "That's what he is. And what does that make you, Genevieve, tell me? What kind of woman does this?" Finally she looked up, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw no fear in her eyes. Only a deep, consuming sorrow. The kind of woman whose husband hasn't touched her in over a year. She said, her voice quiet but clear. The kind of woman who eats every meal alone in a house the size of a museum. The kind of woman who cries herself to sleep every night, praying for a single word of kindness from the man who vowed to love and protect her. Her words were a salvo he hadn't expected. He stopped pacing. "This is your excuse? Loneliness. So you went and spread your legs for the first man who showed you a shred of attention. It wasn't like that," she said, shaking her head, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "It wasn't an affair. It was one night. A moment of catastrophic weakness. I was at a charity luncheon. You were supposed to be there, but you cancelled for a last-minute meeting with her." She didn't need to say Victoria's name. I was devastated. I felt so utterly alone, and he was there. He was kind. He listened. He made me feel seen. For one night. Ethan's mind was racing, trying to place the man. "Who?" he demanded, his voice dropping. "Who was it? Was it that artist, someone from the country club? Tell me who he is, Genevieve. I will destroy him." Genevieve looked at him, her expression a mixture of pity and pain. "You already know him, Ethan. You trust him. You value him more than anyone else in your life." A cold dread entirely different from the rage he'd been feeling began to seep into his bones. He thought of his inner circle, a small, tightly controlled group. There was only one person who fit that description. Only one person who had been consistently kind to Genevieve. Only one person who had been at that charity luncheon with her, filling in for him. His blood ran cold. "No." He whispered the single word, a denial of a truth he already knew. "Don't you dare say his name." "He told me it was a mistake the next morning." Genevieve continued, her voice breaking. "We both knew it. We were both consumed with guilt. We swore it would never happen again, and it didn't. 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I prayed the baby was yours, Ethan. I prayed so hard. I wanted it to be the thing that saved us. But it wasn't. The name was a grenade in the room, waiting to be pulled. Ethan felt his world tilting on its axis, the betrayal compounding into something monstrous, something unimaginable. He stepped toward her, his face inches from hers. "Say his name," he commanded, his voice barely audible. Genevieve looked him straight in the eye, the last of her tears spent. "Nathan," she whispered. It was Nathan Reed. The name hung in the air, dense and suffocating. Nathan, his best friend, his COO, the man he'd trusted with his company, his secrets, his life. The betrayal wasn't just a knife in the back. It was a blade that twisted, eviscerating everything Ethan had ever believed to be true. His rage, which had been a roaring fire, condensed into a singularity of pure, cold hatred. He left Genevieve's hotel room without another word. The confrontation he'd craved had left him feeling not vindicated, but hollowed out, as if his entire life had been a meticulously crafted lie. He drove not home, but to the Orion Innovations Tower, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that was his true temple. He found Nathan in the executive boardroom, reviewing quarterly projections on a holographic display. Nathan looked up as Ethan entered, a warm smile on his face. "Ethan, I was just about to call you. The preliminary numbers from the Asia-Pacific expansion are—" The smile died on his lips as he saw Ethan's face. "What is it? What's wrong?" Ethan didn't speak. He walked around the massive obsidian table until he was standing directly in front of his friend. He looked into the eyes of the man he had once considered a brother. "St. Jude's Medical Center." Ethan said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "The paternity lab." Nathan's face lost all color. The blood drained from it so fast, he looked like a marble statue. He stumbled back a step, his hand gripping the back of a chair for support. "Ethan, I can explain." "Can you?" Ethan's voice was dangerously soft. "Can you explain how you comforted my wife behind my back? Can you explain how you put your hands on her? Can you explain how you fathered a child that you knew I would believe was my own? Explain it to me, Nathan. Use small words." "It was a mistake," Nathan stammered, his usual composure shattered. "One night, we were both lonely and it was wrong. We regretted it instantly. I love you like a brother, Ethan. I never wanted to hurt you." "A brother?" Ethan laughed, and the sound was chilling. "A brother doesn't betray you on the most fundamental level. A brother doesn't poison your legacy from the inside out." He leaned in, closer, his voice, a venomous whisper. "You're fired, Nathan. Your shares will be seized under the moral turpitude clause in your contract. Your security access is revoked as of this second. I want you out of this building in the next 10 minutes. If I ever see your face again, I will use every dollar I have to ruin you so completely that your own children won't want your name." Security guards summoned silently via Ethan's watch entered the room. They flanked a stunned and broken Nathan. "Ethan, please," Nathan begged, his voice cracking. "Don't do this." "Get him out of my sight," Ethan commanded, turning his back on the man who had been his friend. He stood alone in the boardroom, the city lights spreading out beneath him. He had cut out the first cancer. But the sickness remained. The pieces didn't quite fit. Genevieve's story, her raw pain, had felt true. It didn't align with the picture of a cold, calculating adulteress, and Victoria's convenient victimhood at the gala. A seed of doubt planted days ago began to sprout. He returned to the mansion late that night. The house was quiet. Victoria was asleep upstairs. He went to his study, the room, now a scene of his earlier rampage. As he began to pick up the broken glass, his eyes fell upon something on the floor near the overturned wastebasket, a small, crumpled receipt from a pharmacy. It must have fallen from Victoria's pocket when she'd been in here earlier. He smoothed it out. It was for a pack of cigarettes and a women's magazine. But it was the item at the top that made him freeze. A pregnancy test, dated 2 days before the gala. Why would Victoria be buying a pregnancy test? She had been on birth control. She'd made a great show of telling him how careful she was, how she wasn't trying to trap him like other women might. He felt a sudden urgent need for clarity. There was one person in the house who saw everything, a silent witness to the comings and goings of its occupants, Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper. She had been with his family since he was a boy. He found her in the main kitchen, polishing silver with a methodical focus. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice startling her. "I need to ask you something. It's important." The elderly woman looked at him, her eyes wise and sad. "I imagine you do, sir. The night of the gala, Miss Vance, did you notice anything unusual about her?" Mrs. Gable put down her polishing cloth and folded her hands. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice steady, "I have stayed silent out of loyalty to this house, but my loyalty is to the memory of your mother and to Mrs. Blackwood, who has always been a lady of kindness. It is not to that woman upstairs." She took a deep breath. "The afternoon before the gala, Miss Vance was on the phone in the garden. She thought no one could hear. I was in the pantry. The window was open." Ethan stood rigid, waiting. "She was talking to a friend," Mrs. Gable continued. "She was laughing. She said, 'The idiot actually believes Genevieve is some kind of cheating shrew.' She said she'd been feeding you stories for months. And then she said, and I remember the words exactly, 'All I need is one big public scene to push him over the edge.' I bought a pregnancy test today. I'll tell him I had a scare, that Genevieve's hysterics are stressing me out. He'll choose his future heir over his current one." Then she laughed and said, "The best part is I'm not even pregnant. It's perfect." The housekeeper's words fell into the silent kitchen like stones into a deep well. Each one was a piece of the puzzle, and when they settled, the picture they formed was monstrous. It hadn't just been Genevieve's betrayal. It had all been a setup. Victoria's whispers, her victimhood on the terrace, the timing of her provocations. She had played him like a violin. She had identified his deepest insecurities, his pride, his fear of being seen as weak, his obsession with his legacy, and she had orchestrated every event to lead to that one catastrophic moment. The slap, the public break. He was the fool, not just for being cheated on, but for being so thoroughly and completely manipulated by a woman he'd mistaken for an ally. He had destroyed his marriage, his oldest friendship, and his own peace of mind, all while dancing on Victoria Vance's strings. He thanked Mrs. Gable, his voice a hoarse whisper. He walked out of the kitchen and up the grand staircase, his steps heavy with the weight of his own monumental stupidity. He pushed open the door to the master suite. Victoria was awake, sitting up in bed, a triumphant smile on her face. "I got rid of Nathan," he said, his voice flat. Her smile widened. "I knew you would. He was always on her side. Now, with both of them gone, we can finally—" "I also know about the pregnancy test, Victoria," he said, his voice cutting through her words like a shard of glass. "The one you bought before the gala, the one that was negative." The triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. I don't know what you're talking about." "I know everything," he said, walking slowly towards the bed. He was no longer angry. He was something far colder, far more terrifying. He was precise. "I know about the lies you fed me. I know you orchestrated the scene on the terrace. I know you saw my wife's pregnancy, not as a family joy, but as an obstacle to be leveraged and removed." He stopped at the foot of the bed, his eyes like chips of ice. "You wanted this house. You wanted my name. You wanted my fortune. You saw me as an acquisition, a prize to be won. You were very, very wrong." Her panicked expression turned to a snarl. "You needed me. You were miserable with that sad little mouse. I made you feel powerful. You made me a fool," he corrected her. "And that is a mistake no one gets to make twice." He pulled out his phone and pressed a button on his contacts list. "My head of security is on his way up. You will be escorted from my property. You will take nothing with you but the clothes on your back. A restraining order will be in effect by morning. If you or any associate of yours ever attempts to contact me again, I will litigate you into oblivion. Your career, which you value so highly, will be over. I will personally see to it." Tears of rage and frustration streamed down her face. "You can't do this. I love you." Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt nothing. No love, no hate, only a profound and chilling emptiness. "No," he said, his voice the quietest it had been all night. "You don't. And what's worse, you made sure I have no one left to love me either." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her screaming behind him. The sound didn't touch him. He was already gone. The months that followed were a season of silence. The cacophony of betrayal and rage subsided, leaving behind a desolate, echoing quiet in Ethan Blackwood's life. Victoria Vance vanished, erased from his world, as efficiently as a failed line of code. Nathan Reed was a ghost in the city. His career in finance destroyed his name, synonymous with scandal. The Orion Innovations Tower continued to gleam. The company's stock continued to rise, but for its king, the victory was ashes in his mouth. Ethan existed in the vast, empty mansion, a wealthy phantom rattling around in his own self-made prison. Mrs. Gable and the staff maintained the home with their usual quiet competence, but their deference was now tinged with a sorrowful judgment he could feel in every polished surface and every silent corridor. He would often find himself standing at the window of the master suite, the same window where Genevieve used to stand and stare out at the city lights, wondering how many of those tiny sparks represented a life that contained genuine warmth. He didn't contact Genevieve. His pride, though shattered, was still a formidable barrier. What could he say? That he was sorry he had believed the lies? That he was sorry he had been a cold, neglectful husband for a decade, creating the very vacuum that Nathan had stepped into? That he was sorry he had struck her? The words felt inadequate, pathetic. He had acted as judge, jury, and executioner, and he had been wrong on every single count. His punishment was to live with the consequences. 6 months after the night of the gala, a plain, discreet envelope arrived at his office. It was not from a lawyer. Inside was a single high-quality photograph printed on matte cardstock. It was a picture of a newborn baby, swaddled in a soft white blanket, sleeping peacefully. The baby had a full head of dark hair and a serene expression. On the back, in Genevieve's elegant script, were 3 words. Her name is Hope. There was no request for money, no accusation, no return address. It was just a simple, profound statement, an announcement of a new life that had begun entirely separate from him. He stared at the photograph for a full hour. Hope, a name that felt like both a promise for her and a final damning verdict for him. This child, the one he had coveted as a legacy, the one whose very existence had triggered the collapse of his world, was now a symbol of a future he had no part in. Far away, in a small, sun-drenched coastal town hundreds of miles from Sterling Heights, Genevieve Sterling rocked her daughter to sleep. She had used the trust fund from her father and the generous, uncontested divorce settlement from Ethan to build a new, quiet life. She had rented a small house with a garden a block from the ocean. The air smelled of salt and flowers, not floor polish and regret. Her healing was a slow, uneven process. She had nightmares about the slap about Ethan's face, contorted in rage. But then she would wake up to the soft gurgling of hope in her bassinet, and the fear would recede. She didn't hear from Nathan, and she didn't seek him out. Their moment of connection had been born of mutual loneliness and despair, and it had resulted in a miracle and a catastrophe. He was a part of Hope's story, a fact she would have to explain one day, but he was not a part of their future. Her future was about peace, strength, and the fierce, all-consuming love she felt for her daughter. She was no longer Genevieve Blackwood, the CEO's wife. She was Genevieve Sterling Hope's mother, and for the first time in over a decade, she felt free. Back in his sterile office, Ethan slid the photograph back into its envelope. He did not throw it away. He placed it in the top drawer of his desk beneath quarterly reports and acquisition plans. It would remain there, a tangible reminder of his failure. He had built an empire of wealth and power, but he had failed at the one thing that truly mattered. He had mistaken control for connection, possession, for love and legacy, for a living, breathing family. He was Ethan Blackwood, the millionaire CEO, the master of his universe, and he was utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone. The silence in his gilded cage was no longer a disease. It was his life sentence. And so the story of Ethan and Genevieve comes to a close. It's a chilling reminder that the brightest fortunes can cast the darkest shadows. Was Ethan a villain, or a man blinded by his own arrogance and manipulated by those he trusted? Was Genevieve's betrayal justified by a decade of neglect, or was it an unforgivable breach of trust? And what about Nathan and Victoria, the catalysts who lit the final match? This story is a tangled web of human failing, where pride costs more than money, and the truth comes at a devastating price. What do you think? Who is the most wrong in this story? Could any of them have been redeemed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of betrayal, lies, and consequence moved you, please smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a dramatic tale. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.